Hey, welcome back. My name's Ryan, and this is Ask the Pastor. The internet sends me questions, and I record myself giving answers. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking into a void, but you can make me feel less like that by giving comments and interacting and building community here on the internet in this time when we are socially isolated from one another. Here is the question for today. It's from one of our YouTube viewers, MMM, or perhaps, he says, why are various Bibles different? Good question. And it kind of is manifold in its answer. So at the core, at the kind of most foundational element, the truest answer I can give you to that question is that actually, secretly, they aren't. They aren't. All Bibles come from this. This is the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Graece, the Greek New Testament. There is, of course, also a Hebrew Old Testament from which we translate virtually every different translation of Scripture. There used to be two kind of standards of these, of the Greek New Testament, and they were so similar, these two different scholarly bodies that put together what it was that the authors wrote in their original language, which was Greek, or for the Old Testament, Hebrew, that they combined, and they became one standard of the Greek New Testament, of the Bible in its original language. But if you look at it, and let me see if I can get it in focus there. If you look at it, you've got these little weird squiggles up here. That's the Greek language. So if you speak that, then you're in good shape. And then you've got all these little squiggles down here, which are what we call the apparatus. And that indicates the differences of different textual variants. So how confident we are that this particular Greek version of this text is the one that was originally written by the first author versus one that was changed. And we keep track of all of the changes. The vast majority of the changes are silly things, synonyms from one another. Somebody says stick, another person says rod, but we still keep track of all of that and incorporate it into this thingy, which is what we then translate the Bible from. So if you don't go to school for 3 years and learn to read Greek and Hebrew and learn to translate the Bible for yourself, like I did for some reason, then what you end up with is one of these things. One of these books that are behind me. These are Bibles. And there are tons of different ones. I'll even, I've got this whole shelf is Bibles. And they're all pretty good. I agree with all of it. They're all slightly different, but they're all representations of the true text, which again is right here. They're representations of the Greek. Now, if you've ever encountered another language, you know that there are sometimes slight interpretive choices we can make in translating a language. If you see, a sign that says baño, you might know literally that means bath, but practically speaking, that's a bathroom. But then if you're speaking to maybe someone in an older generation and you don't want to say the word bathroom, you might say, oh, that's where the water closet is, right? Like you're referencing the same ideas in slightly different words. And that's what the vast majority of differences between different Bibles, between everything on this shelf here, stems from. It's how formal or informal do we want to be, how direct or indirect are we going to be with the translation, and what year is it as we make the translation, because the English language doesn't stay the same. It evolves a little bit over time, and so if you get a translation of the Bible that's been made more recently, such as the CEV, the Common English Version, it will render things a little bit more the way people talk today, whereas if you get an older version, like say the NASB, that will render things a little bit more the way they spoke, in the 30s or 40s. I'm not sure even exactly when the NASB came out. But there is an exception. There are a couple of Bibles, most notably the 1611 King James Version, but also the New King James Version in a little bit of a diminished capacity, where there actually is a difference of what Greek text we're using. Because in 1611, when we translated the King James Version, you might think, oh, we had more information. That was older. That's closer to the time the disciples wrote it. So we must have, like, forgotten less. We've been playing the telephone game for less long. But that's not actually true. In 1611, we had access to certain documents from the ancient world, which at that point was, 1,500 years ago. It was a long time. We had lost track of some things, and we did our best. And if I may say, the King James Version did just a bang-up job. They created a really beautiful translation of scriptures that rendered a lot of the art and the imagery into English in a way people really appreciated, in a Shakespearean kind of verbiage that is still valued as maybe the most beautiful era of the English language to this day. And for that reason, it's really stood the test of time. But since that time, we have dug up documents which we dug them up more recently, but they are older. So the newer manuscripts, the manuscripts that were uncovered in more recent times, such as the 1960s, are from earlier in ancient history, closer to the 1st century when these texts were written, most notably a particular codex called the Codex Sinaiticus, which is a near complete copy of the New Testament. And it has some slight differences from what we'd call the received translation or the majority text that we had prior to that point, which is a bit newer. Most notably, there are a couple of verses which are included in the majority text, which are not in the Codex Sinaiticus, and which there's not room for, right? It's not like there's just a hole in the piece of paper and we're missing something. It seems to us that some of these verses were added later. One of them is called the Johannine comma, where it just throws in an extra Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in the middle of nowhere. And so there are some people who worry about what exactly are you translating from and why. But if you're a layperson, if you're not involved in translating your own copy of the Holy Scriptures, really, I'd encourage you don't need to worry about that. And you could read a King James Version if you wanted to. I'd argue the texts there are not as good, so you're not actually receiving, as King James onlyers will argue, a better version of the Holy Scriptures. It's actually worse, but it's not bad. It's not super wrong. You're not going to miss out on important doctrines or theology, unless, of course, you don't speak Elizabethan English, in which case you will, not because it's not rendered there or not translated there, but because you won't understand it. Now, there's one more wrinkle that I want to talk about in this complicated issue that so many people talk about, and that is the fact that while everything on this shelf here is legit, there are some translations of the Bible that are not legit, and I keep them over here on this shelf. I keep this stuff behind glass, sort of as a joke. When people come in for pastoral counseling, I have a bunch of books here that are representative of other religions or representative of criticizing Christianity. So they're things that are important to my life and faith, and I read them and study them, but I don't want to, necessarily tout to everybody that comes in, oh yeah, these are great books. Even though some of them they're important books. The Bhagavad Gita is really fascinating and interesting, but I keep it behind glass as kind of my banned books section. So let's delve together into my banned book section. Here's one. This is the New World translation of the Holy Scriptures. This is typical. This comes from the Jehovah's Witness community. And so what they've done, which again is what most of the times when you're dealing with a illegitimate translation of the Scriptures, what will be done is they took a translation, they took an English translation of the Bible, and then somebody who was in some kind of spiritual authority prayed about it and fixed the translation based on what they felt that they heard from God at the time. So some of these verses represent things that are not rendered in Greek. They're not actually true to what the Greek New Testament says in any of the manuscripts or texts or things we've dug up, but it's been recovered or restored or fixed, they'll say, quote unquote, fixed, from what we have in these archaeological, scientific, multiply corroborated sources. So that's the New World Translation. I've also got down here a Joseph Smith translation. Joseph Smith did the same thing. He died before he finished it. But you can there's a Joseph Smith translation of the first part of the book of John, for instance, where it removes, and all of these Bibles over here, you're going to see it rendered, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Joseph Smith decided to add an A. So the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Because Joseph Smith did not believe in the Trinity, and he wanted to fix that part of the Bible. So he just changed it. Another one you'll see is the recovery version. I don't actually have a copy of one of those, but you'll see people throwing those around on college campuses trying to give those out. It's a bad translation of the scriptures because it's not properly a translation. Somebody received new light and tried to recover it. Now, even with these bad translations, they're mostly, like, with the exception of a couple verses, the same. It's just a couple of changes that are made, but there's one that gets talked about a lot, and this one's kind of cool. This is my Jefferson Bible, and you can see that it's quite small compared to the other Bibles. Jefferson went through the Bible and he removed the vast majority of the Old Testament and all of the parts of the New Testament that have to do with miracles. He found the moral teachings of Jesus to be really worthwhile, and the other parts of the Bible to be superstitious nonsense. So he took a pair of scissors, metaphorically speaking, and made his own version of the Bible. That's the kind of difference that we worry about. That's a major difference. And I would argue that if Jefferson had read a little bit deeper into the story of the Exodus, he might have understood some different context about those moral teachings of Jesus and how important it is to God that we let the slaves go free. I hope this answers your question. If it does answer your question, I want to encourage you to share this video. If this was helpful or illustrative to you, I want you to share it. If this doesn't answer your question, please ask me for more details. Let me know what other ways I can fill in blanks for you to make more sense of this reality. And if you've got your own question, I hope you'll send it to me. You can put it right down in these YouTube comments, and I will read it, and I will make a response just as I made a response to and I will see you next time on Ask the Pastor. Thank you.